Hi everyone, welcome back to Wild Mystic Tales. Let's dive into today's story.
Tear this whole place down. Kofi shouted, pulling his mistress tighter against his side while his wife stood alone in front of everyone, publicly humiliated. The crowd stared. His mother smiled proudly. His younger brother laughed like this was some kind of show. Then the demolition foreman slowly approached with a document in his hand, his face suddenly drained of color. "Sir," he said carefully, "who exactly owns this house?" And in that single moment, everything Kofi believed about his life began to collapse. Now let me take you back to that Saturday morning in Atlanta, Georgia. Bright sunshine, birds singing, one of those calm spring mornings that looks perfect from the outside. But beneath that peaceful sky, a storm was waiting to explode. Outside a massive suburban mansion, demolition trucks lined the street. Bulldozers, cranes, workers unloading heavy equipment like they were preparing for war. The neighbors had already gathered outside with their phones raised, because nothing spreads faster in the suburbs than rich people destroying each other in public. Standing at the center of it all was Kofi. 38 years old, dressed head to toe in designer labels, gold watch flashing in the sunlight, looking arrogant enough to believe the entire world belonged to him. Wrapped around his arm was Ayana, 26, beautiful and flashy, dripping in expensive jewelry, smiling like she had just secured the winning lottery ticket. She kissed his cheek, laughing loudly for everyone to hear. But several feet away stood Nia, quiet, motionless, 36 years old, wearing plain jeans, a simple white shirt, and no makeup except exhaustion. She held a worn leather journal tightly against her chest, like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. She wasn't crying, wasn't yelling. Somehow that made it worse. Beside Kofi stood his mother, Lorraine, proudly clapping like this humiliation was a family achievement. Her church hat sat perfectly on her head, even though it was Saturday morning. Next to her, Terrence, Kofi's younger brother, recorded everything on his phone with a grin stretched across his face. "This is legendary," Terrence laughed while filming. "My brother finally replacing dead weight." Kofi raised his voice even louder, so every neighbor could hear him clearly. "I said tear it all down. Every wall, every room, every memory. My wife doesn't deserve this place anymore. This property belongs to my real woman now." Ayana squealed excitedly and waved at Nia with fake sweetness. "Thanks for babysitting the mansion for me, honey." The disrespect was so ugly it made some of the neighbors visibly uncomfortable. But nobody stepped in. Some people whispered nervously while others kept recording like they were watching reality TV. And still, Nia said nothing. Not one word. The demolition foreman, Dennis, a man in his 50s with decades of construction experience, walked toward the property holding official county documents. Before demolishing any home, ownership always had to be verified. Legal problems could destroy an entire company overnight. At first, Dennis looked calm. Then he stopped walking. His eyes narrowed. He checked the paperwork again. Then again. The colors slowly disappeared from his face. Even the workers unloading equipment noticed something was wrong. One by one, they stopped moving. Dennis turned around slowly and walked back toward Kofi. "Sir," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something before we continue." Kofi smirked. "What?" Dennis swallowed hard. "Whose house is this?" Kofi burst out laughing. Loud, arrogant, mocking. "What kind of dumb question is that? It's my house. I paid for it. I've lived here for 10 years. Dennis slowly lifted the deed in his hand. "Sir, according to county records, this property has never belonged to you." Silence. Real silence. Ayana's smile disappeared instantly. Lorraine frowned in confusion. Terrence slowly lowered his phone. And for the very first time that morning, Nia lifted her head. The look in her eyes wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was certainty, like she had been waiting for this exact second for years. Dennis cleared his throat again. "This property is owned by the Thornton Family Estate Trust, established in 1947. Kofi blinked rapidly. "That's impossible. I have mortgage statements, tax papers, contracts." Dennis shook his head. "No, sir. You've been making monthly lease payments to the trust for the last decade. $1,500 every month. Kofi's mouth opened, but no words came out. Then Nia finally stepped forward. Calm, steady, controlled. Every eye followed her. Even the neighbors stopped whispering. You're right, Kofi, she said softly. You did make payments every month, and every single payment went directly into my family's trust account. Terrence looked frozen. Ayanna stared at Kofi like she suddenly didn't recognize him anymore. Nia slowly opened the leather journal and removed a folder packed with neatly organized documents. My grandfather Moses never talked much about money, she continued quietly. But what he never told people was that our family owned hundreds of acres of land in South Carolina long before most black families were even allowed opportunities like that. Lorraine's expression started changing from confidence to panic. Over 70 years, Nia continued, that land became shopping centers, apartment developments, farmland leases, and commercial properties. My family stayed quiet while the trust kept growing. The entire street had gone completely silent, except for the wind moving through the trees. 3 years ago, after my grandfather died, I became sole trustee. She pulled out another document and handed it to Dennis. Please read the balance out loud. Dennis stared at the page. His eyes widened so much it looked painful. Then he read it. Current liquid assets, $800 million. A woman in the crowd gasped loudly. Terrence dropped his phone onto the driveway. The screen shattered instantly. Ayanna stumbled backward in shock. What? Kofi looked physically sick, but Nia still didn't raise her voice. That calmness made everything feel even colder. This house, she said quietly, I allowed you to believe it was yours. My grandfather taught me something before he died. He said, never interrupt people while they reveal their true character. So I watched. She turned toward Ayanna. You can keep him. I don't want him anymore. Then her eyes shifted back to Kofi. But the mansion, the luxury SUV, the credit cards funding her shopping sprees, none of it belongs to you. Ayanna's breathing became shaky. Nia continued. The vehicle was repossessed from the mall parking lot 40 minutes ago. The credit cards were frozen at 9 this morning. And the apartment you rented for your mistress? She paused. The lease is under the trust, too. You both have 72 hours before eviction begins. Ayanna looked at Kofi with absolute horror. You told me you owned everything, she whispered. You lied to me. Kofi's hands started trembling so badly he could barely keep them at his sides. For the first time all morning, the arrogance disappeared from his face. His voice cracked when he tried to speak. Nia, baby, please wait. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of this. We can fix it. Nia looked at him quietly. Fix what exactly? She asked softly, but now there was something colder beneath her voice. The part where you humiliated me in front of strangers? The part where you brought bulldozers to tear down my home so you could impress your mistress? Or maybe the part where your family spent 10 years treating me like I was worthless while living under my roof? Every word hit harder than shouting ever could. Kofi opened his mouth again, desperate now, but nothing came out. Nia turned toward Dennis, the foreman. There won't be any demolition today, she said calmly. Please send your cancellation fees and crew expenses directly to my attorney. They'll handle everything. She handed him a sleek black business card. Dennis looked at it, then at her, suddenly understanding exactly who he was dealing with. Yes, ma'am, he said immediately. Of course. Then Nia slowly faced Lorraine. The older woman's confidence had completely vanished. Her lips trembled underneath that expensive church hat. Nia, sweetheart, I never meant. You called me boring. Nia interrupted gently. You said I wasn't good enough for your son. You invited women to family dinners to flirt with him while I sat at the same table. You treated me like I should feel grateful just to exist in this family, inside my own home. Lorraine's eyes filled with panic. I didn't mean it like that, but Nia had already turned toward Terrence. And you, she said, you filmed this entire thing, posted it online so thousands of strangers could laugh at me. Terrence's face lost all color. I'll delete it right now, he said quickly. I swear, I'll take it down. Nia shook her head once. Don't bother. My legal team already saved everything before you could. Terrence looked like he might throw up. Then, without another word, Nia walked calmly toward her car. Not a Bentley, not a Rolls-Royce, just a simple silver Honda Accord. Quiet money, old money, the kind that never needed attention. The crowd instinctively moved aside for her. Nobody spoke. Nobody even dared whisper anymore. She opened the driver's door, paused, then rolled the window down one final time. Her eyes locked onto Kofi. Not with love, not even with hate, just finality. My grandfather used to tell me something, she said quietly. Never reveal your hand until the game is almost over. She gave him one last look. Today, I finally played mine. Then she drove away. Calm, smooth, no speeding, no drama. And Kofi collapsed right there in the driveway, literally dropped to his knees. Ayana was already backing away from him with her phone pressed against her ear, desperately calling somebody else, probably searching for her next rescue plan. The neighbors stood frozen in absolute shock. Some were already dialing friends before Nia's car even disappeared down the street. By nightfall, the story would spread across Atlanta like wildfire. And Dennis? Dennis and his crew slowly packed up the equipment in silence, shaking their heads like they had just witnessed something they'd be talking about for the rest of their lives. But to truly understand what happened that morning, you have to go back much further. Back before the mansion, before the betrayal, before Kofi ever entered Nia's life. Back to a small town in South Carolina. Back to the man who raised her, Moses Thornton, the man who taught her one lesson that changed everything. Patience is power. 25 years earlier, 11-year-old Nia lived with her grandfather in a tiny weathered house beside his repair shop. Her parents had died in a drunk driving accident when she was only 7 years old. One terrible night, one careless stranger, and suddenly her entire world was gone. A tragedy like that destroys some people. But Moses didn't let it destroy her. He held her together piece by piece. Back then, Moses was already in his 70s. Quiet, dignified, the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never had to. In town, people respected him deeply. Farmers brought him broken tractors. Families brought lawnmowers, engines, generators. Whatever was broken, Moses fixed it. But almost nobody knew the truth about him. Moses Thornton was wealthy. Not flashy rich. Real rich. Generational rich. The kind of money that moves silently because it doesn't need validation. His father, Samuel Thornton, had purchased hundreds of acres of land in South Carolina back in 1947, during a time when many black families were still fighting simply for basic rights. Most people mocked Samuel back then because the land was considered worthless. Too swampy, too isolated, too difficult to farm. But Samuel saw something everybody else missed. He knew highways would eventually cut through that area. He knew businesses would expand outward. He understood something most people never learn. Patience creates wealth faster than pride ever will. And he was right. Decades later, that worthless land transformed into shopping centers, apartment complexes, warehouses, and commercial developments worth millions. The Thornton Trust quietly grew year after year while the family stayed humble. When Samuel died in 1983, Moses inherited everything. But instead of living extravagantly, he stayed in the same small town repairing engines because he loved working with his hands. And when Nia came to live with him, he raised her with the same values. Dignity over noise. Observation over reaction. Patience over emotion. On her 12th birthday, Moses gave her an old leather-bound journal that had once belonged to her grandmother. The cover was worn and faded with age. She wrote down every promise people ever made her. Moses told Nia as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. And every truth she discovered afterward. Young Nia held the journal carefully. Why, she asked. Moses smiled sadly. Because people always reveal themselves eventually, baby girl. Your job isn't to change them. Your job is to believe them when they show you who they are. That lesson stayed with her forever. Moses taught her chess before she was even tall enough to reach across the board properly. He taught her that loud people usually overcompensate, while quiet people often hold the real power. The loudest person in the room, he used to say while moving a chess piece, is usually the weakest one. Nia grew into a calm, intelligent young woman. Teachers adored her. Friends trusted her. She earned a full scholarship to Spelman College, where she studied business and graphic design. Moses cried openly at her graduation because he was so proud of her. And that was where she met Kofi. At first, he seemed charming, confident, ambitious. He worked in tech sales and knew exactly how to make people like him. Unlike Nia's quiet upbringing, Kofi came from a loud, flashy family that loved appearances and attention. Maybe that contrast attracted her at first. Kofi used to call Nia easy. "You're so low maintenance," he'd tell her proudly, like it was the greatest compliment in the world. But Nia wasn't low maintenance. She was disciplined. There's a difference. They dated for 2 years before he proposed publicly at a crowded family barbecue. Loud music, cheers, cameras everywhere. Nia said yes because she believed in the version of Kofi she hoped existed underneath all the noise. A few years into their marriage, Kofi announced that he wanted to buy a house in Atlanta. Something upscale, something impressive. Nia listened quietly while he talked about loans, mortgages, and ownership. Then later that night, she made a single phone call to her family's attorney in Charleston. 1 week later, Kofi proudly signed what he believed was a lease-to-own agreement for a beautiful suburban home. The paperwork was perfectly legal, carefully written, technically accurate. But Kofi never realized one thing. The property had always belonged to the Thornton Trust, and Nia never corrected him. For 10 straight years, Kofi happily paid $1,500 every month, believing he was building equity in his dream home. In reality, every payment went directly into the trust account. Then tragedy struck again. 3 years into their marriage, Moses died suddenly from a heart attack. Nia was devastated, completely shattered. After the funeral, an attorney approached her quietly and handed her a sealed envelope. "Your grandfather wanted you to receive this when the time was right." Later that night, Nia sat alone inside Moses's repair shop surrounded by old tools, oil stains, and memories. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Baby girl, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And now the trust belongs to you. Every acre, every property, every investment, everything your great-grandfather built, and everything I protected is now yours. But more importantly, I'm giving you permission. Permission to watch quietly. Permission to wait. Permission to let people reveal who they truly are before you make your move. And when the truth finally comes out, act accordingly. I love you forever. Papa Moses." Nia folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the journal. And from that day forward, she started documenting everything. Every late night Kofi came home smelling like perfume. Every suspicious receipt. Every lie. Every cruel comment Lorraine made about Nia's cooking, her clothes, even the way she spoke. Nia remembered it all. Every family dinner where Terrence turned her into the punchline of his jokes. Every fake smile. Every insult disguised as advice. She documented it quietly in that leather journal. Not because she was bitter, because she was preparing. Moses had taught her something most people never understand. When you already know the truth, emotional reactions become unnecessary. Strategy becomes everything. 6 months before Demolition Day, Nia saw the name, Ayanna, appear on Kofi's phone for the very first time. Late-night texts, hidden calls, deleted messages. Kofi suddenly started carrying his phone everywhere, even into the bathroom, into the garage, outside during dinner. Anywhere Nia couldn't accidentally glance at the screen. Most wives would have confronted him immediately. Nia didn't. She simply watched and wrote. Ayanna worked at an upscale lounge downtown. 26 years old. Loud. Beautiful. Attention-hungry. The exact opposite of Nia. And Kofi became completely obsessed with her. Suddenly, he was working late 3 nights a week. Suddenly, there were expensive purchases showing up on bank statements. Designer bags, jewelry, rent payments, weekend trips. At some point, Kofi stopped even trying to hide it. And somehow, his family made the humiliation worse. Lorraine treated Nia less like a daughter-in-law and more like unwanted furniture. "My son deserves a woman who can give him children," she'd say loudly at dinner. 10 years of marriage and still no babies? You're holding him back. Never mind the fact that Kofi himself had said he wasn't ready for kids. Never mind that Nia had simply respected his wishes. In Lorraine's mind, blame always belonged to Nia. Terrence wasn't any better. If my wife was that boring, he joked once during dinner, I'd upgrade too. Everybody laughed. Even Kofi smirked. And Nia? She stayed calm, ate her food quietly, memorized every word so she could write it down later. Then things got uglier. Lorraine started inviting other women to family gatherings on purpose. Young women, loud women, women she knew Kofi would flirt with. "Oh, Kofi," Lorraine would say dramatically. "Remember Shanice from church? She just got promoted again. Such a smart girl." Then she'd deliberately seat Shanice beside him while Nia sat there pretending not to notice. And Kofi played along every single time, laughing, smiling, flirting openly with other women right in front of his wife. The disrespect became suffocating. But Nia never exploded, never screamed, never begged. She simply watched them reveal themselves. Then one day, Kofi stopped wearing his wedding ring completely. Nia noticed it immediately. "What happened to your ring?" she asked quietly. Kofi barely looked up from his phone. "It was irritating me." That was it. A few weeks later, he moved into the guest bedroom. Stopped pretending. Stopped hiding the distance between them. Then one night, after another humiliating family dinner, Kofi finally said what he'd clearly been building toward for months. "I want a divorce." No emotion, no guilt, no apology. Then he added something even colder. "And I want you out of my house within 30 days. Nia looked at him for a long moment. Really looked at him. And for the first time in 10 years, she stopped seeing potential. Stopped seeing hope. Stopped seeing the man she wanted him to become. Instead, she finally saw exactly who he truly was. "Okay," she said softly. Kofi blinked in surprise. That's it. That's it." He almost looked disappointed that she didn't break down. Like part of him wanted the drama, wanted the screaming, wanted proof that he still mattered emotionally. Instead, she gave him calm. And calm terrified people more than chaos ever could. After he left the room, Nia quietly closed the bedroom door and collapsed onto the bed. She cried harder than she had in years. Not because she was losing Kofi, but because she realized she had wasted a decade loving someone who never truly valued her. Then suddenly, she heard Moses' voice in her mind as clearly as if he were standing beside her. "Baby girl, when people think you're broken, that's usually when you become the most dangerous." Nia wiped her tears. She reopened the envelope Moses had left her. Read the letter one more time. Then she picked up her phone and calmly called the Thornton family law firm in Charleston. Her voice never shook. "It's time," she said. 2 weeks later, Kofi proudly announced his grand plan. He wasn't just leaving Nia for Ayanna. He was giving Ayanna the house. Not selling it. Not dividing in the divorce. Giving it to her. And to make it even more dramatic, he planned to demolish the entire mansion and rebuild a better one for what he called a real woman. The whole thing became a public spectacle. He hired a demolition crew, scheduled the date, posted about it online, invited family and friends to witness it. Lorraine acted like her son had won an award. Finally, she bragged to everybody, "Kofi is making the right choice." Terrence was already brainstorming captions for social media. "This is about to go viral," he laughed. And Ayanna? Ayanna was already shopping for furniture and picking out marble countertops like she owned the future. Meanwhile, the night before demolition day, Nia slept peacefully for the first time in months. She packed only a small overnight bag, a few clothes, her journal, old photographs of Moses. Nothing else mattered. Before going to sleep, she left the journal open on the nightstand to a page that read, "The truth never needs to scream. Eventually it arrives on its own." And the next morning, the truth arrived. Hard. Because karma doesn't knock politely. And 3 months after that public humiliation backfired, Kofi's entire life completely collapsed. First came his job. Human Resources discovered he had been using corporate expense accounts to fund his affair with Ayanna. Luxury dinners, jewelry, hotel stays, thousands of dollars charged to company accounts. He was fired immediately. No severance package. No recommendation. No second chance. Security escorted him out, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box while coworkers stared. Then his car disappeared. At 2 o'clock in the morning, a repo truck quietly towed the luxury SUV straight out of Lorraine's driveway. Turns out the lease had always been connected to the Thornton Trust. The moment divorce proceedings began, Nia revoked authorization. Then the bank accounts froze. Every remaining dollar Kofi had quickly disappeared into legal fees as he desperately searched for some way to claim part of the trust. But every lawyer told him the same thing. You have absolutely no legal claim. One attorney reportedly laughed after reviewing the paperwork. The trust existed decades before you were even born, Mr. Williams. Your wife owned everything long before she met you. Eventually, broke and humiliated, Kofi moved back into his childhood bedroom at Lorraine's house. 38 years old, divorced, unemployed, publicly embarrassed. And the video Terrence uploaded? Oh, it definitely went viral. Just not the way they expected. The internet destroyed them. Bro fumbled a billionaire because he couldn't stay faithful. This man demolished his own future live on camera. She was playing chess while he was finger painting. People recognized Kofi everywhere after that. Grocery stores, gas stations, restaurants. Strangers whispered when he walked by. Friends stopped answering his calls. Professional connections disappeared overnight. Nobody wanted to be associated with a man who publicly humiliated himself on that level. And Ayanna? Ayanna vanished instantly. Before the demolition crew had even finished packing equipment that same day, she had already blocked Kofi's number. That night, she was reportedly out having dinner with a professional athlete she met at the lounge. Kofi tried showing up at her apartment repeatedly, sitting outside in Lorraine's car, calling her phone over and over again. Eventually, Ayanna came to the door, but she never opened it. You told me you were rich, she screamed through the door. You lied to me. Then came the line that completely shattered him. I don't date broke men. Lose my number. Kofi sat in the parking lot crying for nearly 2 hours before security forced him to leave. Meanwhile, Lorraine desperately tried reaching out to Nia. Calls, texts, emails. She even showed up at the law office in Charleston, hoping to speak to her in person. Security escorted her out of the building before she made it past the lobby. By then, Nia had blocked every possible way for them to contact her. Every phone number, every social media account, every door was closed. And once Lorraine's church friends discovered the full story, the embarrassment became unbearable. The entire church community eventually learned the full story. Not just the cheating, not just the public humiliation. They found out how Lorraine had spent years tearing Nia down behind closed doors. How she encouraged Kofi to abandon his wife. How she stood there smiling and clapping while that young woman was publicly humiliated in front of an entire neighborhood. One Sunday after service, an elderly church mother quietly pulled Lorraine aside near the parking lot. Sister Lorraine, she said firmly, that woman was covering your son with grace while you mocked her for years. God sent a blessing into your family, and you treated her like dirt. Shame on you. Those words spread fast. And just like that, Lorraine's reputation collapsed. The women who once called her for advice stopped answering her messages. Invitations disappeared. Even her weekly prayer circle quietly replaced her without explanation. Nobody trusted her the same anymore. But Terrence? Terrence got hit in a completely different way. Because while everyone else was laughing online at first, Nia's legal team was already building a case. Defamation, harassment, invasion of privacy. That viral video became evidence. Every repost, every comment, every monetized view. Millions of people had seen it by then. Then his employer, a corporate bank, discovered the video too. Terrence got called into human resources on a Thursday morning. Mr. Williams, the HR manager, said coldly, your online conduct does not reflect the values of this institution. He was terminated before lunchtime. The lawsuit settlement cost him $75,000. Money he absolutely didn't have. He sold his car, took out loans, maxed out credit cards, and eventually, humiliated and broke, he moved back into Lorraine's house too. Then his girlfriend left him the same week. Didn't even argue. Didn't even come back for most of her things. She sent one text message, I didn't sign up to struggle with you. Then blocked him everywhere. So now Lorraine's house held both of her grown sons. Both unemployed. Both embarrassed. Both blaming each other for ruining the family. The divorce itself was finalized in a cheap office next to a strip mall tax service. Kofi hired the cheapest lawyer he could afford. By then, he barely had enough money left to survive. Nia never even showed up. Her attorneys handled everything professionally and quietly. Kofi signed the papers with trembling hands, walked outside into the parking lot alone, and just stood there staring at traffic like he didn't recognize his own life anymore. Because in many ways, the life he thought he had was already gone. 6 months after Demolition Day, Nia was living in Charleston near the water. She purchased a peaceful estate overlooking the coast. No flashing lights, no giant gates, just calm beauty and privacy. The kind of place where mornings begin with waves instead of chaos. But the most important thing she did wasn't buying property. She restored Moses's old repair shop, brick by brick. Instead of turning it into a museum, she transformed it into the Moses Thornton Foundation, a community center focused on financial education, mentorship, business development, and legal aid programs for young Black entrepreneurs and women trying to rebuild their lives. The opening ceremony was packed. Hundreds of people attended. Local news covered the event. Community leaders gave speeches. Even the mayor showed up. But Nia stayed mostly in the background, letting the staff and program directors speak instead. Because that's who she had always been. Quiet power. Strategic impact. Every week, she mentored young women personally. She taught them how to protect themselves financially, emotionally, and legally. She taught them patience, observation, discipline, and she constantly repeated Moses's favorite lesson. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is preparation. One evening, Nia sat alone on her porch, overlooking the water while the sunset painted the sky orange and gold. The leather journal rested in her lap, the same journal Moses gave her when she was 12 years old. She slowly opened it to a blank page and began writing. Papa Moses, you taught me patience. You taught me dignity. You taught me that silence is not surrender. You told me people eventually reveal exactly who they are. And you were right. I believed them when they showed me. And then I acted accordingly. Not with revenge. Not with noise. Not with cruelty. But with wisdom. I waited. I learned. And I survived. I hope I made you proud. I hope I protected what you built. Most of all, I hope you know your baby girl is finally free. When she finished writing, she gently closed the journal and placed it beside an old framed photograph of Moses sitting inside his repair shop, smiling proudly at the camera. A few minutes later, one of the young women from the foundation stepped onto the porch carrying 2 cups of tea. Miss Nia, she smiled, your financial literacy class starts in an hour. You ready? Nia smiled back. And this time, the smile was real. Peaceful. Free. They sat together quietly for a moment, sipping tea while the waves rolled in across the shoreline. And for the first time in years, Nia realized how light her life finally felt. No tension, no pretending, no surviving, just peace. Kofi tried contacting her once after the divorce. Not directly. He sent a message through a mutual friend. Tell Nia I'm sorry, he said. Tell her I didn't understand what I had. Tell her I know I was wrong. Nia read the message once. Then she replied with a single sentence. I wish him well from a distance. That was the last response he ever received from her. After that, silence. Permanent silence. The last anyone heard, Kofi was working retail and living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. And the drama somehow still wasn't over. Ayanna eventually became pregnant after dating that athlete from the lounge, but he disappeared the moment things became serious. Then rumors spread that Ayanna tried dragging Kofi into the situation because he had once promised to always take care of her. The DNA test came back negative, but the legal mess kept going anyway. Ayanna eventually got engaged again to another man she met online, although people close to her claimed he was already cheating too. Funny how patterns repeat themselves, because karma rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it takes the scenic route. Sometimes it circles back slowly just to make sure the lesson hurts properly. These days, Lorraine and Terrence barely even speak to Kofi anymore. Too much resentment, too much embarrassment, too much blame. Family dinners disappeared. Holidays became awkward and quiet. The family that once laughed together while humiliating somebody else now avoided sitting at the same table. And Nia? Nia never looked back. She traveled when she wanted, expanded the foundation, invested wisely, mentored young women, protected her peace fiercely. She never checked up on Kofi online, never searched his name, never cared enough to ask how he was doing. That chapter of her life was dead and buried. Because the truth is, people often mistake kindness for weakness. They see calmness and assume defeat. They think silence means someone has no power simply because they aren't screaming. But real power doesn't need to perform. Real power doesn't threaten. Real power watches quietly, learns patiently, plans carefully, and when the moment finally arrives, real power simply reveals itself. That's what destroyed Kofi in the end. Not revenge, truth. The moment that foreman lifted the property deed and asked one simple question in front of everybody, Kofi's entire illusion shattered instantly. And the craziest part? Nia was already free long before that day ever happened. She just hadn't shown them yet. Moses was right all along. Baby girl, never let people see what you're holding until it's time to play your hand. And when Nia finally played hers, the game ended immediately. Because karma never loses an address. Sometimes it just takes its time getting there. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.